Hello, 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 and welcome back to Modern Education. I'm your host, Benjamin S. Woodford, here in the studio once again on a Friday afternoon commute home from 3 to 4 p.m. We are all the way live in the studio, and as always, I have got my talented and lovely co-host sitting next to me.
This is Emily Quiles in the studio with Ben Woodford.
What? We are back again, and I am super, super excited. I would throw out an F-bomb right now if I could, but this is family radio, so we don't do that kind of thing. But the point is, I am stoked to be able to talk with everyone today about, you guessed it, education. That's what we do here every week, Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. We are here. If you have thoughts, we'd love to hear from you, 855-723-9010. You can text us, and we'll see that in the studio monitor. You can always hit us up on the Twitter, at KZSU or at KZSUDJ. We will also see those tweets in real time. And you can also check us out on the social medias. We've got Modern Education on Facebook, Modern Education on KZSU on the Instagrams. I am Ben Woodford1 on Twitter. And we're
all over the social media, and we're here.
What are we going to talk about today, Emily? I feel like it's something central to what's been in the news. We don't usually do mainstream news because it's, sucks usually, but we're going for it today.
We're going for mainstream news.
Where are we headed?
Yes, Operation Varsity Blues.
Oh, I like what you did there. She gave it a title, ladies and gentlemen. Now,
I think it's a very clever title that they put out, and I almost want to use it, but because when you say scandal, the college admissions scandal, it sounds so scandalous. It is, but I also really like Operation Varsity Blues because we're talking about this varsity, like elite Ivy League universities who have basically where basically wealthy families have been able to get in their children to these Ivy League schools by just bribing, paying, having pictures that weren't even their children. Like, all of these different types of scandals have come out, and it is, at least from my understanding, Stanford, it's really kind of changed a lot of the ideas and mentalities and what people are saying and thinking about college admissions. Yeah,
and nobody pays to get into a widely accepting state college. Why do you think people are paying to come to these specific universities?
Oh, because they're elite. They're supposed to be the number one think tanks and people that are influencing government to society to all these departments, and they have really do have leaders in academics and education. So it makes sense that they would, honestly want to pay. But at this point, and what that means of fraudulent activity to being accepted is just astonishing, because we've been seeing this, right? We've seen this in different shapes and forms in how we are accepted. So, for example, I'm thinking of a legacy or paying for a building.
Sure. Okay. So these are more the socially accepted ways that people buy their way into the system.
You could claim it as that, more socially acceptable. Yeah.
Right. Now, I want to jump a little bit in here and just think about, why is this so upsetting, right? And I think this is a central piece of what's going on, and not necessarily a central piece of what's being talked about, because we are all up in arms because of this supposed upsetting news about money being able to bribe your way through life. And the reality to me is that's not really news. Everybody already knows money buys your way through life, and you can get the easy road on almost anything if you have enough money to do it. So I think there's something a little deeper underlying this that people aren't necessarily talking about, and I'm hoping to expose a little bit of that in our opening few minutes here. So let's talk about why people are actually upset. Now, there is I would say, a delusion or an illusion going around that school is the great equalizer, right?
Education. If you get an education, then you have access to equal opportunity. That type of spiel.
And this narrative is a really appealing one for people who are coming from a lower class background.
Definitely.
Because they think, I can work hard and get a fair shot and move into a higher level of society through a process we call social mobility, which is just moving up the chain. I think some people are socially mobile downwardly mobile, but no one really aspires to that, right? So the idea is that anyone can make it, anybody can get a shot at the next level of societal hierarchies, if you will. And this is something that has essentially been a real big driving force in why people buy into going to college and why people are continually trying to kind of get to that next rung in the ladder, is because we have a narrative going on in this country and really across the world. America has been very successful at creating this narrative, which is that people can get ahead.
Mm-hmm. If you work hard,
right,
you can get there.
Right. And when you look at the college system, now a lot of people talk about this, and I don't necessarily agree, but I think the way it's structured, it's close enough that we can go with this. People look at it as a zero-sum game, which means if there are, 1,000, just for ease of calculation, if there are 1,000 admissions available to get into Stanford each year, then only 1,000 people are going to get into it. And for every one person that bought their way in, that means one person who might have earned their way in didn't get a shot, right? And so this is, I think, the heart of the problem, is that, one, we believe school is supposed to be the great equalizer, which means it is not based on where you came from or what your parents make or, who your daddy is or whatever, whatever the perception is of that. We want to think of school as an equalizing force that allows a fair chance for everybody. Now, there's some problems with that. A lot of problems with that.
What's one of them?
Well,
just one of the problems.
So let's think about this in terms of capital, right?
Okay.
Now, there are some pretty famous philosophers and sociologists that have thought about capital, and one of the prevailing ones is Pierre Bourdieu. I think that's a kind of wine, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a place.
So Bourdieu actually came up with a sociological framing of how to think about capital. And he claimed, and I think this is the prevailing view at this point, is that there's three types of capital: economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. Yeah. Now, within those three, we kind of have a clear picture. Social capital is sort of value bestowed on you by society. I would say it's safe to put degrees within that frame of
as
capital.
a social capital.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can gain social capital by earning degrees. I'm doing air quotes here, earning, because it may be debatable whether or not everybody's actually earning the same degree with the same amount of work. I think that's actually pretty clearly not the case, but we can just say if it is earned, then that is a certain type of capital that is very hard to come by. To be able to be bestowed a degree requires a certain level of hard work and years of dedication, and to be able to get a degree from a top-ranked elite Ivy University requires many, many years of that follow-through. So it's not an easy thing to come by. It truly is something that we have adopted as a society as a form of capital. Now, the problem lies in when you consider economic capital. Because economic capital can be handed down, it can be gifted, it can be sort of grandfathered in, if you will, so that someone can have economic capital, such as our president, without ever having earned the ways that capital was accrued, right? It was given, it was handed down, it was inherited, right? Now, people really, I would say in this situation right now, the current climate, they are mad because they are seeing the transparency that some people are able to buy their social capital.
Yeah.
And that is sort of what I would like to frame as the inherent problem here, is that we thought social capital was earned, or at least most of us actually, like in academia, especially those of us that study education like myself, we don't actually believe that at all. And there's really a huge amount of evidence showing that it is not, in fact, earned
even from the K
or
through 12
meritocratic.
System.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And we're going to go into a lot of that stuff throughout the hour, so stick with us. But the basic disconnect, I believe, is that people feel concerned that social capital should not be able to be bought.
Well, I think this is interesting to talk about because you kind of think about education, it's like a commonwealth type of thing, but it's in a system where when you're, at least in a system that is brought by capital that these institutions and things are sustained by how much money they have. It makes me question how much of that, if you claim it to be commonwealth, for it to actually be commonwealth. If it, like one of them, they were saying, oh, well, it's universities are just a business, so of course this would be happening.
Right.
Like, but if this education was meant to be for all, like you're saying, with like these coded social norms of what we think it should be, and then how it actually is completely different.
Well, if you remember our guest a couple weeks ago, David Labrie came on, and he's one of the, I'd say, leading scholars around this. He wrote a paper quite a while, maybe 92 or 93. I could be wrong on that, but David Labrie wrote a paper about public goods, private goods.
Yes, yeah.
And it basically lays out the idea that school is serving many masters. And the way to think about that is, yes, school is a public good. It's supposed to create citizens and facilitate social mobility and things of this nature. But it is also a private good. And the way that plays out for most of us, like feet on the ground, rubber the road, how it actually plays out is that we want the best for our kids. We want the best for our family. This is what's known as, in the literature, as social reproduction.
And it really is, I think, the root of what's going on. When we see how education has been played out, even like mentioning K through 12, of like what are parents doing to try to get their children to advance in the system, to try to do the best, and whether that be to do just as well as them, better, or even better.
Right. And as we spoke about when we had David Labrie on the show, the inherent problem is there is nowhere to go if you start at the top but down, right? So there is a real imperative for people being born into a privileged background or a background of means, that there's only really one place to go when you start at the top, and that is down. So to be able to have your kid be born into the life of luxury and then fall from grace, so to speak, there's a real imperative for parents of these children to keep them at the upper echelon. This is where they were born. This is what their parents believe they deserve to have. Many of us, I think, seem to forget the difference between having and deserving.
Yes.
Which is a whole nother show. I think we did that show a couple weeks ago, right?
Probably in there somewhere.
Anyway, the point is there isn't really anywhere else to go. So there, these rich, famous, elite parents, right? They don't have anything to lose by trying to use their money, their economic capital, to be able to buy social capital, right? Now, is that fair?
I mean,
it's hard to say, right? I mean,
to me, I think if you're going to spout out a dialogue by the university saying, that these are all admissions are done equally, opportunistic, for mobility, etc. And yet when these things are happening, a lot of the universities as well are playing the side of the victim, that they had no clue of what that was happening, and that this had nothing to do with their admissions process itself, but like they're saying with coaches, bribery, that was separate from the admissions process.
Right.
And Stanford itself was also releasing statements, which I would like to note, Stanford is one of the only universities, when I was doing some research, that has actually made an accessible statement. Like some have only just put things out to responses to an article, like one line.
Sure. Stanford is really good at branding.
Yes.
They do
They've done very well on that.
They do so much work to maintain and build and buy their brand.
But to be fair, on a sense of transparency, that at least gives them, I would say, a point in the playing field of what's
Somebody
happening.
in Stanford's marketing department knows how to work the crowd.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure if they didn't think it would help their brand, they would have not released those press releases.
I'm not saying that because
I agree. It's a good
thing. They're good,
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that at least on how these universities are responding to it, whether like you're saying a good or bad thing, at least Stanford has actually made a stance.
I agree.
And they have declared it as not okay, and that all the funds that have sent out to the that have been funded to the university won't be used, that they're going to figure, they haven't found out a plan, but they're going to figure out if the funds have already been spent, how that's going to end up being taken back, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just really interesting in the document, let alone that they had published, of just how they said that no form of that you have with money will save you a spot for Stanford. And for example, with the case with the sailing team, that with the sailing team, that they will not and continue to not if you have someone in the sailing team that has been recruited, they are still held to Stanford's academic prestige.
Sure, and that's almost like a cookie cutter statement anyone's going to make in this situation, right? Like, oh yeah, we're not part of this, and we're going to hold people to high standards. Good, that's great, right? Now, to me, there is so much to unpack here. I really don't have enough time. Honestly, we're only 16 minutes into the hour, and I already
it's already been.
I already need an extra hour. Maybe we can wrap this up with a nice bow in an hour and just send it on its way.
Hopefully, we help you guys in understanding this.
Here's what I'd like us to think about for a little bit. Right? There is a perception that people are getting in here because they're the best of the best. Now, that may be true. There's certainly plenty of high achievers here, right? I think we could honestly, I think we can honestly say everybody didn't buy their way in. In fact, probably the majority didn't buy their way in.
And we only have about 50 to 30 cases in this, let alone.
Sure. Right. And I would argue that this is still just starting to unfold. And if one person was running a racketeering business like this, a lot more. There are probably many, many others that just haven't been caught yet.
Yes.
But let's just assume this is all, right?
Assumed.
Now, this is accounting for one type of inequality. This is the type where you are illegally bribing your way into colleges. What about people legally buying their way in?
So is that through building purchase, or construction purchases, or legacy?
That's part of it, sure. Now, if you think back to capital, right? And there's cultural capital, there is social capital, and economic capital, right? If you're born into a family that is heavy in all three of these, you have essentially bought your way into a different style and lifestyle and capacity for your life from the day you were born. Now, beyond just the economic capital to buy your way in, there's cultural capital that is essentially bestowed on everyone who is born into the upper echelons of society. They have the ways of speaking, the ways of deferring to authority, the ways of following rules, the ways of using language and conventions and customs in a way that advantages them at every step of the education process, from the day they're born, from the day they enter kindergarten, first day of high school, first day of college, and beyond.
Yes, because if a parent is wealthy, they have more of the ability, for example, to make sure that student gets the highest curriculum, maybe has AP classes offered in that high school.
Yeah, and beyond that, I mean, if you are an affluent parent who's been through college and has a PhD or a master's degree or whatever, you understand how to talk to the teachers, how to ask them for what you need. You understand what is available to you and what your rights are. And that is a form of cultural capital that further privileges certain kids. You know, if you're a teacher and one kid has a parent who's like, you're putting my kid in AP, you're putting my kid in AP, and the kid is halfway close enough to be there, you're going to let them in because you don't want that parent bugging you constantly. And they're just, you know, it's like, why not let them in? But then the same kid or another kid with the same ability level may not have a parent that's advocating in the same way. So what we end up with is that it is capital that is forcing these changes at every level.
I think this is an interesting point to bring up in relation to, I hope I'm not misconnecting something, just because what's the one phrase that everyone likes to say, just because of causation doesn't mean,
correlation is not causation. That's right, yeah.
But there's, I think 1 in 12 universities that have a suicide center trying to help students there's increased rates of depression, suicide in this environment, let alone. And
we had 2 students die very recently. Wow. They haven't exactly, I don't believe, given exact causes, but I believe it's all related to mental health. And this is not uncommon. especially in these high achieving universities. Yeah.
The pressure.
Right.
If like what you're talking about is this pressure that is put onto these children at such a young age.
Right.
Just to get into college. And if you keep putting that pressure and pushing it, because like a lot of them, and at least was released in the statement, that a lot of these students didn't even know that their parents did this.
Which I don't know if I totally buy, but like whatever.
But
Give
even
them the
if
benefit
so,
of the doubt.
yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Let's at least paint that picture that if these students didn't know and their parents are continuing to push and do whatever limit that they would want to push to get their child into that university.
Right.
Like, what else have they done? I was like, I would be such a skeptical kid at that point. I'd be like, what have you done to me to try to advance me?
Yeah. And what about the other side of that? Like, you could be mad that your parents have done this for you and like fooled you into thinking you're good, right?
Yeah, the worst way to find out that you're not smart enough.
Right. But then the other side of that is, what if you believe you actually earned it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So this creates a situation where there's people going out into the world, being graduates from elite universities and becoming the masters of the known universe, who think they earned it, think they deserve what they had. And that, I think, is even more scary. Because it's one thing for a kid to go, wow, my parent is a total jerk and lied to me and made me think I was worthy when I really wasn't. Yeah. And it's probably the parents' fault in the first place that the kids weren't worthy to get into those schools because their parents thought they could buy their way through life instead of actually making them work for it, right? So,
I mean, well, thinking about how all of these, how equality is spread out, how you're saying that if you have cultural capital, economic capital, and social, that I believe at least at that point, if you have all three, then you're way more ahead. But then there is no really level of equality.
That's right.
Like there is no equality if those are in there.
I want to draw a parallel here, and I think this might be instructive, and if people disagree with me, feel free to tweet us or text us, 855-723-9010. We are here in the studio for the Modern Education Radio Hour, and I want to parallel this, and I'm going to just set this up a little bit first. So think about why people are so mad, right? If we see this as a zero-sum game, and the ability to be able to buy your way into an elite university means that you have kicked someone else out who is not able to be in there. We've had this argument for many, many years, just not about
going on for a long
but not about rich people.
Yeah.
This argument has been framed for many years around affirmative action. Affirmative action essentially says save a few spots for kids who may come from underprivileged or minority backgrounds, or however you frame that. And people, primarily rich white people or middle-class white people, have been furious and fought viscerally against affirmative action. Why? Because we're saving spots to allow people a chance to get in their foot in the door to a place where maybe there might be a white kid that was more qualified. Great, right?
But the thing is, you can almost flip it on its head that actually, indeed, I think I was listening to this college admissions. I can't remember exactly what university she was speaking from, but the process that they make is basically, at first, there are a lot of spots reserved for the wealthy kids who are giving money to the university.
Right.
That is just a given because they have to be able to maintain the university. They claim it for community, for just
we can't give a top-notch education to the affirmative action kids if we're not spending the money of the rich kids, right?
Exactly. It's
I mean, that's a reasonable thing to claim.
But the thing is like these spots, what people are saying these spots are claimed for, that it's not fair for one or the other. No, these spots are being claimed on both ends, but they haven't been claimed for minorities until recently.
Well, yeah, and there is a lot to unpack there, so we got to kind of like streamline this a little bit. Yeah. I'm just going to try to give a 30-second elevator pitch about why that's true, okay? Yes. There's been systematic racism in the country since its founding. Black people were brought here as slaves and economically disadvantaged from the moment they set foot on this shore. Therefore, after hundreds of years of systematically disadvantaging a certain group of people, There was never a level playing field in the first place. So even after civil rights movements and everybody who's trying to equalize that playing field, it's clear that there's still a systematic disadvantaging, which means at some level you have to start opening doors for people who have been downtrodden for generations. And that is the minimum you can do to start making reparations for the systematic, multi-generational downtrodden that America has done as a policy outwardly and transparently for a long, long time. How'd I do? Was that it?
That was A+.
Did I nail it?
I at least on my end, I think you did.
Okay. Now, the point here, why that's important is because that has not been, in my mind, I can't dictate what's important to the entire world, but it's my show, so I can dictate a little bit. Now, think about this. The difference is we have been talking about affirmative action as if it is something to be debated. Why? Because there's a level of people who want to protect their privilege, and by allowing some people in, they see that as taking away the social capital capacity for some of the more probably middle class, because the upper class people, they're going to end either way. That's not even a question, right? Now, to me, the real problem here is a lack of transparency.
On the university's end?
On everybody's end. When we are living a life in a society that is fooling everybody and telling a story that is not the real story, we are not being transparent. Just like when we are trying to tell people and fool people into believing that there is a true meritocratic society happening here and college is the great equalizer, that's not true.
Now we're in a post-racial society.
Right.
Yes.
And it's just not, it's just simply not true. So to say that is to start on a false premise. So let's start maybe like, let's say I'm in charge. I'm at least in charge of the show, so I can do that. But let's say I'm in charge of the whole education system. Okay. I'm keeping affirmative action. Why? Because it's the right thing to do based on our historical past, right? What else? Why don't we start thinking about it on the other side of the spectrum the same way? Sure, we should save some spots for rich people. You should not be automatically demonized because you're rich, but you should also not get to subvert the system and be secretively brought in ways that people don't agree with or get even to see, right? This is the transparency.
I'm not saying that these kids aren't smart. I don't know them, but they should at least be qualified to have gotten into the university.
You know what? I don't even care about that. Like, if they're going to buy their way in anyway, let's have a lottery, or even better, a bidding war. And if we're going to let, 10% of Stanford students in because their parents bought their way in, instead of giving them like, oh, you can buy us a building and we'll let your kid in, or, oh, you went here, so your kid goes here. That's clearly systematically privileged the people who are privileging the people who are already privileged.
Yeah.
Let's say 10% of admissions, or whatever the affirmative action number is on the other side of the spectrum. Let's say that same percentage is going to go to privileged white kids or whatever color, I don't care, privileged kids whose parents can afford to pay for their way in. And then let's start a bidding war, letting them know that they have to pay dearly to get those spots. It might go up
get them to gamble,
$50 million because you
go.
don't have as much money as Bill Gates's kid or whatever, right? At least then we're bringing in real
You'd have
money.
An interesting university,
right? Now I'm going to go a little farther here. Okay. After that, let's put a little label on their degree saying that their parents bought that degree for them, right? Why not? That's truthful. That's real. That's transparent, right? Now, here's the other side of that. Affirmative action kids who get in through affirmative action, they live their entire life being stigmatized and people wondering, did you get this degree because of affirmative action? Did you kick my kid out of that year's pool because you got in and they didn't? Are you the cause of why my kid had to go to some lower tier university? And this is not something that people talk about, but it is something that happens in real time in the lives of people who maybe got in because of affirmative action. Maybe they didn't at all, right? Maybe
we've seen this in court.
Sure.
Hundreds of times.
And the point is that stigma follows people of color long after, even when they've attended a university like this. So why doesn't it follow the rich kid, right? And all I'm saying is we could do the same thing on both ends of the spectrum. There's no reason why we shouldn't.
Like redirect the conversation.
Let's be honest, right? If you can start with an honest conversation, personally, I'm not going to go picket because rich people get to stay rich. I really don't care. They're like, they want to be rich. They want us to think they're wonderful. Fine, you're wonderful. Get the stupid degree and move on with your life. Nobody really cares about them, you know? The reason why we care, to me, is because of the false impression that it is supposed to be a fair system, right?
I mean, it's the idea that we've amassed this like equal opportunity education can get you places, like you were saying in the beginning, and it's not. And I think it's just like the overall frustrations of how we've felt with the pressures of university again, and all of these just like built up. And this case just proves to everyone on the mainstream public to think, well, then it's all a scam. And that's why as well, was it the two students who have sued, is it they sued Stanford or?
I think it's a class action lawsuit.
Okay,
yeah. So they're sort of going for a blanket.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that in place, that's exactly what they're saying, that now that this has happened, it's devalued their education, saying that people are going to claim that they didn't deserve it, or that the easy people can easily get into these. You could just pay your way through to get to this, that you don't actually need to earn this degree.
Right.
And that is a bit scary and terrifying to think that, like, we are going, how do I even put this? Like, that everyone is taking on at this in so many different levels of understanding and so many different levels of frustration, because university has been a central keynote to our lives as Americans. Right.
Now, this thing about devaluing a degree, right? It's like, oh, Stanford got in trouble because, who knows how many people are involved in this, but because some subset of people thought they had the right to circumvent the system, right? Now, does that devalue the degree? I don't know. I would say a year from now, nobody's going to really care about this scandal anymore, and that degree is still going to be worth much more than the degree at the next college over, and City College or wherever
Stanford,
people happen to be.
It'll be able to bounce back. Like,
yeah.
All these universities will continue to be able to, like, keep pushing out their dialogue, like you were saying.
Right. Now, the thing is, what really devalues the degree is the sheer number of people getting degrees. This is known as degree inflation, right?
Of credentialism. How many people?
Right. And the thing is it used to be, back in the 1950s, if you got a bachelor's degree, you were pretty much set. Right? You were the upper echelon of the educated people in the world. That degree meant you were a professional and you can go into a lot of, managerial or corporate or whatever jobs. And that degree meant something, right? Now, this is all part of the conversation that I still don't think is really happening around this concept, because degree inflation is essentially a byproduct of more and more affluent and middle-class families having the ability and the money and the means and the time to be able to send their kids to college. So each generation has successively sent more and more children of their children, the upper echelon children, to college, therefore gaining the social capital to certify them as being competent. And this process has essentially made it so education needs to be more and more higher achieving to be able to get the same social capital that a bachelor's degree used to afford, right? So now, instead of a lot of people getting a bachelor's degree, now everybody needs a master's degree, because you can't even get your foot in the door with a high school diploma.
Keep going up and up,
right?
And
yeah,
up.
and they're going to have to invent another degree after PhD, because there's so many PhDs being graduated now.
Yeah. But to be fair, at least for the two girls who have gone to court for this, to sue, one came from, I hope I'm getting this right, one came from Stanford and the other came from Yale.
Sure.
They're very elite colleges.
Right.
I don't think that will ever be devalued. Like, if you're coming from a university, like a state school, or someone that was like a small little university, I can understand like that. I mean, this isn't even related to the scandal itself, but degree inflation, that my degree isn't being valued as much anymore. But if you go to Stanford, it is known that you're pretty much set because you have the connections.
Yeah, that's true. And this is, again, I can go back to our interview with David Labrie, where he was talking about the sheer status that comes along with these higher tier
status.
universities. Yeah. And there is a huge racket to maintain this hierarchy. Just like SATs serve as a function of sorting people into their worth or their merit, which is a highly racist system that is designed by white people to privilege white people by essentially saying that the cultural capital that these people have is somehow inherently the right capital to have. And therefore, if you grew up in a white middle class family, you understand the language and the wording of even just simple word problems on SAT because they were written by people like you. So, I mean, if you had the SAT being designed by black people, they would probably have different wording in the questions, and therefore black children reading it would have a advantage reading those types of problems. They were written by people that talk like them, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a simple, pretty much obvious fact as far as I'm concerned. If you talk like me and I write you a problem prompt, you're going to understand it much better than if you don't talk like me and I write you a problem prompt. Therefore, we are essentially privileging these so-called objective tests simply by the nature of who created them.
It's setting a standard. It's setting a standard of this is how we want you to like comprehend this information. If you don't comprehend it in that way, whether or not be that you're white, black, Asian, etc., it's just setting it as like if you don't fit that, that's it. You didn't do well enough.
You don't possess the intelligence that we value.
And as far as I'm concerned with this, that we know now two very like weak spots in the university admission system being sports and SATs, ACTs, testing.
Sure.
So with that in mind, I sure hope there's going to be some talk about how are we going to change our testing? How are we going to change? Because that is an obvious weak point in the admissions.
Right. And that is something that's been being tried to be worked on for quite some time now. And to me, there's a fundamental problem with why we haven't been able to make testing more equitable.
And it's testing.
Well, yeah, essentially, think about it like this. A test is by its nature biased simply for the fact that somebody created it.
Yeah, just thinking about like the way a survey is made. Like if you know the survey enough, or even who's writing that survey, you can answer it in a way to make it in your favor. Sure.
And there's even been research showing that simply changing the order of questions can drastically change the outcomes for people. So there's not really any objective way to measure people's knowledge in that form, right? I mean, think about it. If I give you an easy addition problem and then structure a slightly harder addition problem that is directly following that one that came before it, I've just set you up for success. And if I do it in the opposite direction, you might miss both of them. And there's so many other things that underlying the problems with testing. But I think fundamentally the problem is that we're measuring and caring about the wrong things.
What do you think we should be caring about when we're trying to evaluate a student?
Well, there's a piece out there that sort of floats around in all the different circles about 21st century skills and how, things like teamwork and collaboration and, empathy and things like this are probably more important.
Emotional intelligence.
Sure. And, you could take that route. I don't know if I do totally buy that or not. But what I would say is that we care about what we can measure. And as soon as we decide that things like SAT, which are really a subject-specific form of IQ test, when we look at something like that and say, this is what we care about, then we structure an entire system around something that is essentially flawed. Because those tests are known to have the properties of continuing discrimination.
And let alone like how much money your parent can pay to get you like as tips, or was it study guides, people to tutor you.
Yeah,
classes, because that's everywhere.
If you want your kid to do really well on the ACT, you can hire me. I'll charge you $300 an hour, but I can get your kid in the top 3%. Why? Because that's where I was. So what, right? That is not a privilege of inherent worth. That is a privilege of being able to get the right person to sit down and teach your kid.
To get the right answer.
Yeah. Sure, I could do that for your kid. Do I want to? No. Will I? Probably not, unless I'm broke and you got a lot of money and it can sway me past my morals. But that's not the point. The point is that this is happening every day for every kid that has the means to do it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we have essentially stacked the deck so far in favor of people who already have money and already have privilege and already have class status and social
capital.
Capital. That's the word I was looking for.
Capital.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for capitalizing on me drawing a blank there. But seriously, there is just no way to think that we have a level playing field unless you're just missing how many levels that the deck has been stacked against certain people in society. But I got derailed a little bit. I know we love tangents here, but I want to go back.
Where are we going back to?
I want to go back to thinking about the difference in the value of a degree from my undergrad was Cal Poly, and now I'm doing graduate work here at Stanford, right? Mm-hmm. I went from a state school to an Ivy League school. Mm-hmm. And, Cal Poly is a very good school. It's high ranked. It's well respected. It's a great school. But no one would argue that it has the same social capital that a degree from Stanford has.
Of course.
And, whether or not that's right, I think it's pretty clear to say that the value of your education should determine how valuable your degree is, if that is in fact what you need from an education. I would argue maybe the facts we learn and the skills we learn along the way are not nearly as important as the connections we make, the conversations we have and remember from that, and the long-term, network that we bring away from that education.
It's true.
Right.
Is the people you're around really do make up who you will become. You could be, you think about it on just like when you're a kid, if your parents would be like, make sure you hang out with the right group of friends.
Yeah, they say
otherwise
they say you become the average of your 6 closest friends.
I think it's pretty true.
I agree, and there's something about that.
The influencers, it's the social construction. It's all of those ideas.
Say it again.
Social construction.
See, I put her on the spot. She's like, I can't do my goofy voice now.
They heard me the first time.
Okay. So the way I'm thinking about this, right?
Yes.
What comes next? Now, I threw out like an idea. Maybe we can think about like looking at affirmative action on both sides, or maybe we can think about testing in a way that doesn't automatically privilege someone who has a tutor and all these other things, right? But where does this go after this, right? Do we persecute all of the people responsible and then say, there, it's done? I say no.
Well, like even in the statement that Stanford released, that they're saying that this has happened in the past.
Right.
And the fact that this is just a reoccurring thing, just like little like slap on the wrist or telling the kids, no, don't do that. It's not going to it's not going to change anything. I wish I had some amazingly planned solution to give and share everyone on air, but I'm stumped there. I don't know the solution, but I know that what we're doing now hasn't changed anything.
Right.
So there needs to be some, like, whether that be through the universities. I mean, you can even argue then, since the universities haven't made any statements because they're too worried about what the public is going to say and how they're going to spin it.
Right.
I would at least argue that universities have a great responsibility in dealing with this and how they're going to respond, but not even to say like for the media or for the people, but how they're going to change their admissions process.
I'm going to take this a little historical route for a minute.
All right.
So back in, I don't know, the 80s or the 70s, I mean, I was kind of like a baby at the time, so I
wasn't born yet. He was crying.
Okay, but back around that time, and since then, before then, this concept of colorblind racism came up, right? Or just being colorblind. Now, this was essentially a very convenient way for white people to say racism's over. We don't even look at color anymore. Yeah. This is not a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And this did not do anything to solve racism. In fact, I would say what it really accomplished was getting people so socially awkward about race that it squashed a lot of the conversations around race that needed to happen, that still need to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
good point.
I'd say there is a growing trend that parents, white people and white parents are starting to get to a point where they're understanding and recognizing that race is a thing. I just saw an article about this recently,
yes.
and being more willing to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think personally that's a really powerful step in the right direction. It doesn't fix any of the problems. It doesn't automatically mean that we're better people or less racist. What it means is that we're opening up the door to take away the stigma around talking about it.
So having open conversations about this.
You see where I'm taking this.
There we
exactly.
go.
So if you take the analogy and parallel it back to the education system,
yeah.
if we sit around and try to keep pulling the wool over our own eyes, which self-delusion is the worst kind of delusion, if we keep trying to pull the wool over our own eyes and say, this is an isolated incident and there's just one problem, and as soon as we fix that one problem, this goes away, we are essentially doing the same colorblind racist thing, only now we're doing it with institutional blindness. We're saying these institutions aren't propagating or structurally supporting this type of inequality. We do have a meritocracy, and we just need to fix a couple of the bad apples to make that true again.
Exactly.
And that's
fix
not
the bad apples and it's all fine.
Right.
I mean, right. So then you have to argue that it starts in the home, that it's the way that we raise our children. It's the way that we funnel these ideas to everyone, going back to the social constructions. I mean, the way that we view things. And if you, like you're saying, you're turning your eye to the other side and just like not thinking about it or not addressing the problem, then it's just getting worse.
Right. And the problem to me is that it will have to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. And that's the sort of the breaking point, right? When you know something exists and you don't do anything about it, it has just gotten worse. Not because anything changed, but because now we have people who are complacent and silent when they know there's something wrong happening. And that, to me, is a bigger moral dilemma.
So, mobilizing a society to not be silent. Like you're saying, open discussions.
Right.
But I mean, you could argue then that the internet has allowed that to happen, more discussions, or you could say that, bounce it on its head, to say it's become more polarized. No one's talking, only saying what they want to hear or seeing what they want to see.
Well, and the sad part is when we get caught up on the internet or anywhere else with these kind of bipartisan discussions or even worse, partisan discussions where we're stuck in our one world view and we have a limited set of facts to draw from, if there are even facts at all. And then we believe we have an educated opinion on a topic, and that's all we want to talk about is our opinion that is largely unfounded for a lot of us. Now,
I mean, you could even argue that's what we've done.
I don't know about that.
I sure hope not. I hope you don't think that.
I did do my homework before this show.
Hey,
I am a Stanford student after all. I didn't buy my way in here, you know.
I feel like I'm giving my credentials away, but I'm not a Stanford student.
That's okay. But, we don't privilege Stanford as the only place that knowledge can come from around here, but we sure do like Stanford. It's a pretty place to be, I must admit. It sure
is nice.
Now, where was I going to go with this? That's
discussion based.
Yeah. So when it comes right down to it, if we're not continuing the conversation and we're not shying away from the popular narrative saying that this is a meritocracy and there was just one little problem that needed to get fixed, we're not going to fix this. It's not going to change. There's not going to be any systemic push to make the true meritocracy exist in the college system if people aren't willing to have the actual conversation about what's really wrong here.
So is that a government solution or population solution? Action?
Here's my take on that, and I don't actually have an answer other than my own take, and I'm happy to identify my opinion from anything else if I have the chance. Government was not designed to do that function. Government was supposed to help Government was created by the states to serve the state's needs. It was supposed to be local control. That is how the founding fathers saw this country working, and they did that knowing that a top-down like royalty running a country did not work. That's why they wanted a new way of structuring the country. Now, sadly, we are pretty much back to that scenario. We have an oligarchy already. People are getting generationally reproduced into social standing, and that has been happening for so long that we might as well call it a royal family. I mean, the Clintons, the Bushes, they all came from money. They all stayed in money, and there's no one from that family that's not going to repeat that cycle, right? So, in my opinion, the depth of what's going on here needs to be talked about. It needs to be brought into the light, and this conversation has to be bigger than simply prosecuting the offenders.
But I think it's a really good point that you're putting out in the question. The reason why I asked the question is because I think people look up to the government and follow. Like, oh, the government's done this, therefore it must be they did do something wrong, therefore I feel like this. Or like the government didn't do anything, therefore they must be fine. And so at least I believe that people will follow those like social norms and social proofs of like what people have seen and then just make their own opinion about it.
You're more optimistic than I am.
I mean, I at least is that optimistic?
I can't remember the last time I made a decision in my life, in my actual daily life, based on what the government told me was okay.
Okay, yeah, fine.
I mean, like, honestly,
but
I can't
would
think
at
of a
least say that
single
it
thing.
creates the discussion.
Sure.
It creates what is accepted or not. And then if that is talked about enough times, then it's been like what best example is with Trump. Like, he's just honestly the perfect example of how communication works. You can deny as many times as you want. There will still be a group of people following you for that conversation, whether or not it's true. So like you really, I think people look up to some of these figures and like make decisions or at least formulate their opinions around what goes on there.
Okay.
I mean, just because of the Attorney General said this, it's given it weight.
True. And we do look to experts and thought leaders and people who have social status to sort of direct the conversation. That is true. And I think that's part of the outrage here, is that these people who are community or like celebrity figures are essentially letting us down, right? Some of the celebrities...
They're not as perfect as they put out to be.
Some of the celebrities have been let go from their endorsements and things like that, right? I think, again, and I'm gonna kind of throw this out here as our final thought, since this hour went by so fast.
Wow, 53.
Part of the problem here, in my mind, and I'd say there's some work to back this up, but part of the problem here in my mind is that we view celebrities as above the law. And this is connected to so many things. There's no time for me to go into it, so maybe I'll try another 30-second elevator pitch for you.
Let's hear it.
The rule of law is supposed to equalize society similarly to how education is supposed to. And just like people can buy their way into education, which is becoming painfully obvious now, but it has been for a long time from a scholarly perspective, people can also buy their way through legal problems.
Yes.
If you have the money to do it, you can get a top-notch lawyer and buy yourself out of trouble. That means we're in a system where school does not equalize people and the law is not equally applied to everybody. And we as a society have accepted this largely. We look at celebrity and we let them get away with things that we would never let our neighbor get away with. Why? Well, there's actually a psychological mechanism there that is pretty powerful, and I think a lot of us end up falling into it.
Okay.
When we can look at a celebrity who is able to circumvent the law, it gives two things for us. It gives us a sort of voyeuristic way of looking at a life that we may never have.
And wish we had.
Right. And then it gives us something to shoot for, because at some level we believe we can attain that as well. So we have a real interest in letting celebrities off from social responsibility, because allowing them to have this out and have this life of leisure that isn't accountable to anybody creates the illusion that maybe we can have it too.
that if we obtain enough wealth, it can break the law, do whatever I'd like, get my kid into college as much as I want. It doesn't matter.
Exactly. So until our society is able to look really hard at the way we put celebrities on pedestals, the way we don't let law apply equally to everybody, and the way that education is not systematically equalizing the field, but it is systematically propagating the inequalities that already exist.
Yeah.
Until we can have those conversations honestly, openly, and without assigning blame and fault to people on both sides of the system, we are not going to fix this. And no amount of indictments is going to change that.
I sure agree with you. That was a great way to end that, Ben.
So,
yes,
this is another week of Modern Education. I'm your host, Benjamin S. Woodford, here signing off with my co-host,
Emily Quiles.
And we will be back next week, Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. We are always doing live interviews or talk right here in the KZSU studio at 90.1 KZSU Stanford. I am your host, Benjamin S. Woodford, signing off.